Welcome back to Rethinking Politics. We're glad to have you here with us for episode 101. Before we get into the episode, we got a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm going to pause the mic for a minute and clean up this room, and then we will get right back to it.
So just hang tight as you hear the sounds in the background. That's just some cleaning going on.
Dan's got a view of part of the room, and it's just a nightmare. This is my toddler's room, and it's out of control. But anyways, we're gonna push through it. So if I seem a little scattered, I'm gonna blame the room mess, or the fact that Dan's sick. Either of those things, I plan on using for an excuse for my own incompetence.
I was gonna say, I'm operating at probably 70% now. 60% yesterday, 70% today. More than a little ill, and you're talking about how your room is slightly messy, and that's gonna make you scattered.
Dan's like, you think you have an excuse? You've got nothing. I'll show you what an excuse is. So today we're going to be talking about the student loan forgiveness plan that President Biden announced quite recently, Wednesday. And it's got several parts to it. So our plan is we're going to talk about the different parts, what they mean, and then we'll go into it a little bit further. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, what do you mean parts? This is just money that he is throwing at people who have student loans, but there's actually more to it than that. That's just the part that everyone cares about, the money. Who knew? So, the three parts. First part is the debt cancellation, the student loan forgiveness. It's $10,000 is a number that's being thrown around. It's $10,000 in debt cancellation for anyone who has not received a Pell Grant. And then it's $20,000 to people who have received a Pell Grant. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Pell Grants they are purely income-related federal loan. I guess they're just paying for part of your tuition.
The federal grants.
They're federal grants. That's the word I was looking for. I couldn't remember the word. It's a federal grant, so basically they're just going to be paying part of your tuition, almost like a scholarship, except not based off of any kind of performance or academic record, but simply based off of economic need. So in other words, if you are a position where you are in economic need, you'll qualify for more debt cancellation, the $20,000 instead of the $10,000.
And I believe both of these only apply. You can only get this kind of debt forgiveness, $10,000 or $20,000, if you're making less than $125,000 currently. Is that correct?
Yes, or $250,000 for married couples.
Okay.
So that's going to be a large number of people who still currently have student debt, because most people who are making more than that have usually taken care of their debt. Not always. I mean, you've got, medical students who've racked up an enormous amount of debt.
You'll have some lawyers, you'll have doctors.
And so those people are not going to benefit, but they're used to not benefiting because the government doesn't help them out at all ever. So that's just par for the course for them. Remember how the government doesn't care about you? Guess what? They still don't. So a couple of interesting things about that. First of all, I think the Pell Grant thing is interesting, Dan, because in my experience, one of the interesting things about the Pell Grant is that until you turn 24, I believe it's 24, or you get married, even if you file taxes separately from your parents when you're going to school, you still have to factor in your parents' income in order to qualify for Pell Grants. So if you're 22 years old, you're living by yourself in a completely different area from your parents, maybe you don't even get along with your parents, maybe they kicked you out of the house at 18, doesn't matter if, and so they may not be giving you, 1 penny of financial support, but because they're your parents, you may not qualify for Pell Grants if they're making a certain amount of money, which is much more likely than that you're making that amount of money. And so there are a large number of young students who don't qualify for Pell Grants and rack up a lot of debt because their parents aren't helping them, but because their parents exist, they don't qualify for Pell Grants. Sometimes there are, people have parents who do help them out, which is what the Pell Grant designers envisioned, but that's just not how it works in the real world in a large number of cases. So for those individuals who are already kind of getting a kick in the pants from the federal government because they're not getting help with these loans, are getting another kick in the pants where, oh yeah, you're already well enough off that you don't need the 20,000, you only need the 10,000, and that may not be the case, So the current system is somewhat ineffective at accurately diagnosing whether or not you need help. And so it's good to know that this new one-time act is also not great at accurately diagnosing who needs the most help. It's also worth noting that this, like the stimulus checks during COVID, is a shotgun tactic. This is not targeted specifically at people who really need it. It's going to everyone. You know what I mean? My wife's currently going to school. She's been going to school for a while, so we have several $1,000s in student loan debt. But we're not struggling right now. Like, we're doing okay. I mean, obviously we're far from wealthy. We've just got my one income and she's going to school and we have 2 kids. It's work. It's a fight, but we're okay. We never thought, hey, we need someone to bail us out from this student loan debt. No, we got the student loan debt, understanding how much it would be and what we'd have to do to pay it off. That's all part of our plan. So I would not put us in the category of someone who needs to be rescued. But here we are getting rescued anyways. Most likely that debt is automatically going to be removed because we've filed for a Pell Grant, so they have that information. You know what I mean? So we qualify for up to 20,000, even though we don't have 20,000 in debt. Whether or not we actually need it, you know what I mean? And in our case, we don't need it. I mean, it's great. We're happy about it. Who doesn't mind, the federal government giving you more free money, but doesn't mean we need it. Versus there are people who are seriously struggling, and there's no differentiation. You know what I mean? With this portion of the bill, it's just a shotgun effect. Everybody benefits from it, which makes it seem more like a stimulus package than like an actual, an actual solution. Which brings us to the second part. Sorry, what were you going to say, Dan?
I was going to say, so as I'm listening to you, there's a touch of sarcasm in your voice, right, Brian? You seem surprisingly negative about free money, despite the fact that you said you're benefiting and you like it. You know what I mean? If let's say you didn't have any school debt, why would you be upset to begin with that someone else is getting help? Someone else who may need it. Maybe not all of them need it, but some of them do. Some of them could use some help. What's the why the tone of government can't figure out who needs it? And
it's funny that you said that, because I was talking to some coworkers last night specifically about this, and one coworker said, "You know what? I don't even care. I'm just happy that the government is spending money on American people versus all sorts of other random things they spend their money on. I'm just glad that people are actually going to benefit from government spending, because the government spends all this money every year and we don't know where most of it goes. And so I'm just happy that actual American people are going to benefit from it. And I was like, there's some real truth to that. You know what I mean? They estimated it's going to cost about $24 billion per year. That's a very rough estimate, because that's what they've said it is. It's a very rough estimate. It could be more, it could be less. Usually it's more, right? If we've learned anything, it's going to be more. But in terms of government spending, that's par for the course. I mean, we sent almost that same amount to Ukraine already this year. We've spent that amount on several different things. And so $24 billion to help out some American people is not the worst thing the government could do. Absolutely. But President Biden is doing this because he's noted there's a problem. When he announced this, we got a quote here. Quote, "Education is a ticket to a better life. But over time, that ticket has become too expensive for too many Americans." End quote. So that's the problem Biden's trying to fix here is that public education is important, college education is important, but it's unaffordable right now. And so my sarcasm and my negativity towards this is because writing $10,000 checks to people doesn't solve the problem. You know what I mean? Writing $10,000 checks doesn't even address the problem, really. It's just a Band-Aid solution. And examples of how it's a Band-Aid solution is anyone who's already paid off their student loan debt, it doesn't help them. Anyone who worked extra hard to, go to college and pay for it themselves, they don't benefit from it. Like when I went to school, I didn't take out any student loans. I got some assistance from family, but the tuition I paid for myself, and it was expensive and it sucked. It wasn't expensive compared to college, but it was expensive to pay it. You know what I mean? Paying several $1,000s, a year is rough for several years. And so all the people who have been financially frugal and very careful and have worked hard aren't benefiting from this. But people who went to school for a year, didn't really try, failed a bunch of their classes, then gave up, are going to benefit from this. And so there's that inconsistency, there's that shotgun effect that just makes me reticent to praise this part of what's been done.
Let me put it this way and see if you disagree. It sounds like you're concerned that that some of the people that are going to get this don't merit the help per se.
Well, so there's two aspects, I guess. There's merit and there's need. And I'm saying this $10,000 and $20,000 doesn't really look at either. You know what I mean? It's basically saying if you make under $250,000 a year, we're gonna, for a married couple, or $125,000 for a single individual, we're going to assume that you need it, and we're just gonna give it to you. And that's not an accurate assessment of need. You know what I mean? If someone owes $4,000 in student debt that they've been slowly paying off over time, they're making $100,000 a year, and they're doing just as a single individual. To argue that person is in desperate need of government bailout just seems false, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Versus you may have someone who's got $60,000 in debt. They got a degree that they were promised was going to allow them to get a better job. There are no jobs available for that degree that they're able to find. Now they're 5 years out of school. They have this crippling $60,000 debt. They're working, a $10 an hour job bagging groceries, and they're paying all this money into their student loans, and they just feel trapped. That person has much more of a need than the other person. You know what I mean? And this $10,000 and $20,000 doesn't really distinguish between those two beyond the Pell Grant. That's what I'm saying. Okay. It's not just merit, it's also need, because I understand that one of the big arguments against this is the merit aspect, and I was getting into that in terms of what did you get your degree for, what thought, what planning, how frugal were you with your money, and all of that is absolutely true, that is not being taken into consideration. But on top of that, need isn't really being taken into consideration either.
So I agree with that. I think a lot of people, the main motivator for the people who have been politically interested in student loan forgiveness for a long time is the need. And that need stems from, if you were to say, there's lots of people with needs in the United States. They're struggling with something. This warrants particular attention from the federal government because it stems from a federal program, which is where these student loans are coming from. Mm-hmm. At this point, it's $16 billion is the total owed.
1.6 trillion.
This is a good example of what 70%. We mean when I'm operating at 70% here. I occasionally read things, and it just comes out as not the thing I read.
It will cost the government $24 billion a year to forgive some of the debt of the $16 billion that's owed.
The 1.6 trillion that's owed. You just said the figure I did.
No, I was making a joke.
Oh.
about how that wouldn't make any sense.
I was also telling Brad I'm going to be really slow on picking up his jokes. They're usually wordplay, and I just can't seem to follow them very well today.
Wordplay mixed with some heavy sarcasm.
With some right. The tone, interpreting the social cues, all that. Okay, so 1.6 trillion is what's owed. There's another 131 billion in private student loans, but that's unaffected. That's a side thing.
Yeah, the 1.6 trillion is the federal loans, which is what this is about. That's the main focus.
Yes, that's what can be forgiven. So there's another statement that I hear, Brad, that maybe is worth addressing here before we move on to the second thing in this bill, which is that there's really no reason to be upset about this because the loans are just being forgiven. It's just being wiped. The U.S. government is the debt holder. They just say, "Hey, forget about it," and it doesn't cost us anything. Is the claim? I've heard people say this. There's no. You said it's costing $24 billion, but these people are convinced it's costing nothing because it can't, because it's just wiping something away.
So if I were having a conversation with someone who said that, I would say awesome. In that case, because the White House press secretary has said the reason that we took so long to do this, and the reason it's $10,000 versus $50,000, specifically what she said, those are the numbers that she cited, 10,000 versus 50,000, is because we want to do it in a fiscally responsible way. If it's true that just erasing the debt is fiscally responsible, doesn't actually cost us anything, and if it doesn't cost anyone anything, then it's definitely fiscally responsible. You know what I mean? Picking a gold coin off the sidewalk while you're on a walk and then, pocketing it is very fiscally responsible. You know what I mean? Because there's no cost to it. There's no one goes bankrupt because they picked a coin off the sidewalk. It's just free money. You just take it. It's great. But the reason they didn't is because they admitted that that's not fiscally responsible, which clearly implies, it's almost explicitly implies, which is oxymoronic, that there is a cost, a very real cost to any debt cancellation, and hence the $10,000 was chosen because it was a smaller amount and therefore more fiscally responsible. In other words, any amount is at least to some degree fiscally irresponsible because of the cost, because of that $24 billion a year.
Yes,
and it makes sense. If it didn't have a cost, if it really was just free, then wipe the 1.6 trillion. Say we're done. We're any debt you owe, you no longer owe. From the smallest $500 loan to the med students who still own $250,000, it's all cleared.
Yes, yeah.
And while we're at it, we'll continue to loan money, but we won't require any of it back. You know what I mean? Since clearly we can loan money and then not require it back, and that costs us nothing.
Yes. In accounting, obviously, this would be written down as an asset. You own the debt of $1.6 trillion. This is factored into all of the accounting of the United States federal government, and to wipe that away is effectively to lose $1.6 trillion. And
that's where they're getting their $24 billion is in lost revenue. That's coming in yearly. That's why the cost is stated yearly versus stated all at once. Because you could state it all at once depending on how you're choosing to account for it. And because it's the federal government, there are no laws like a business has, so they can account for the loss however they want. And I think the $24 billion a year is reasonable because that's the effective impact on the budget. You know what I mean? Because is that $24 billion each year isn't going to be coming in, and so we're going to need that money to come from somewhere else. Because believe it, they're spending that $24 billion that's been coming in every year. And so
believe it, they're spending that $70 billion, that 24 of which has been coming in every year. Yeah, it was odd to hear what seemed to be serious people putting forward that argument. this doesn't actually cost us anything. What are you talking about? Well, why don't we forgive every loan? What is it? It doesn't affect anyone.
No, it's the same. It's a similar argument that was said during the stimulus packages. It's just free money. It doesn't really cost anything, so let's just do it. And here we are with serious inflation and economic issues that are at least partly a result of those many stimulus packages, and we are learning there are real costs to it.
Okay, so we've established the cost. We've established that this isn't actually doing very well by measures of merit or finding need. It's just kind of a shotgun effect, as you described. What's the second and third part? Because I think we've probably reached the end.
Well, I want to say
anyone knows about it. Go ahead.
I want to say one last thing about why this first part is in there, because the more I look at it, the more I think the second and third parts are where the focus should be. The reason this first part is in here is, I think, for two primary reasons. The first reason is that it was a very well-known campaign promise by Biden that he was going to cancel student loan debt. And so that's something that if he doesn't do, people are going to notice. And I think Biden's team has been making a serious push in the last few months to fix his image. And this, I think, is one prong in that plan, in that attack, to change his image around before the midterms. Even though he's not coming up for election, a lot of Democrats are, and how the president is perceived affects how the rest of the party gets elected. And so I think this is a push for the midterms and fulfilling a campaign promise on the one hand, and on the other hand, giving another stimulus check to millions and millions of Americans without calling it that is also going to be helpful. You know what I mean? Because it's going to be easier to vote for someone when the leader of that party just bailed you out of a hole. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh. Yes. So there's the political expediency.
Mm-hmm.
You said there was a second.
That was a second. No, the first is a campaign promise. Second is a stimulus package under another name.
I see.
Sorry,
okay.
I didn't number those well when I stated them, but those are the two aspects.
Yeah. There's certainly political motivation to do this. If you break it down by voters, the people who vote for Biden disproportionately have student loans. There's a very clear, who is this helping? This is helping my supporters, and that's why they wanted me to do this, and that's what I promised I would do. So there's definitely some real political incentive here to act on this.
Yeah. Okay,
okay.
I was going to go to the second part of the plan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do we want to talk about the effects of this particular portion, or do we want to talk about the effects of the whole thing at the end?
Either way, I don't care.
Either way. Okay, well, let me just note here then, and maybe we'll have more to say about it later, that I was one of those people like you who tried to be extremely frugal, went out of my way, took time off from school to work, did a variety of different things in order to pay for my schooling, because debt by definition means you're paying more than what you were doing, and so I avoided it. And it's not always I'm not saying you should always avoid debt just because you pay extra later. There's reasons to sometimes, but and that has come at great personal sacrifice, right? And so you can practically feel the anger from a lot of people that this is happening. A lot of really, really angry people. But that's not even the big thing. People feel like they were ripped off. They already paid off their loans, like you said, or they didn't take any, or whatever it may be. I'm not particularly angry. I actually thought about it. I was joking with a friend. I was like, Biden's in office. He said he was going to forgive loan things. They aren't going to be able to forgive nearly what he promised, but I bet they will at some point forgive 10,000. That figure had been thrown around, a year ago, 2 years ago. And I thought, part of me thinks that I should take out $10,000 in student loans.
Because you were currently going to school, so you would have qualified, and you wouldn't have had to spend that $10,000 on tuition or whatever. You know what I mean? You could have just taken out $10,000.
Yes. No, they don't care what you spend it on. You you get $10,000 can be living expenses. You could go to a casino for all they care. And it looks like I was right, that I could have done that. And if you don't think that in the future more people are going to be considering that, and they're going to go, which way are the political winds blowing? What is it? What kind of precedent does this set regarding debt? Because you absolutely, by forgiving debt, incentivize people to take more of said debt.
And it's not just, we're not talking specifically about people trying to game the system like Dan's scenario.
No,
we're just talking about how knowledge of what politicians can do will affect people's everyday decisions. You know what I mean? Like my wife is still in school. You know, we're going to have the thousands of dollars we have now erased, but she's still taking out, she can take out more loans in the future as we go through this, because we don't have enough money right now to pay for her school and our living expenses with our two kids. It's just, we can't make it work. And so we're taking out a small amount of student loan debt. We're going to feel a little bit more comfortable taking out that student loan debt. Psychologically, just in the back of our minds, we're going to be less hesitant about taking out that debt, knowing that there's a chance in the future it could be wiped out again. Even just an unknown chance. The fact that it's happened before is going to change how we're looking at that debt. Even as we're trying to be frugal, it's just going to be there in the back of my mind, that it's almost fake money. You know what I mean? Who knows what's going to happen? And if you don't believe that's not going to change how people are choosing to go into debt in terms of college, then I think you're absolutely wrong.
Yeah, for the same reason the bailouts in 2008 change the incentives of the big businesses and the corporations and banks that were affected, right? The same reason that all political action to simply step in and solve the problems create they make it more likely that people will make those choices again on the off chance that they're bailed out again, right? If a bank is too big to fail, well, that's good news for them. They can, they can do
good news for banks.
That's right. And that's not right. This is an unintended consequence. I don't think they're trying to lead people to do this, but if the problem is that the loan system is bad and leads people into circumstances where they desperately need help, and that's some kind of systemic problem, which it absolutely is. When we talked about student loans last time, we went into the incentives of how it works and the unlimited credit and the debt. You can see that in a previous episode of ours if you search for it. Then you're encouraging, you're making it more tempting to engage with a system that is terrible.
Yeah, and most people would argue, well, this is just a one-time thing. It's not going to happen again.
That is the funniest thing.
Well, in that case, that's even worse, because you're going to have people who are going into debt with the belief that you are going to save them. And if you're not going to save them, then you just lured them into financial ruin. So that's something that you're going to have to live with if politicians ever had to live with any of the consequences of their action. So don't worry about it.
If anyone ever felt responsible for the political system.
If there was any accountability for politicians, you would have to live with this. But as it is, don't worry about it. So that brings us to the second part of the changes. And these changes are a marked improvement from the first change. So the first part of the plan, stimulus package. Second part of the plan is actually looking at changing how the loans are repaid for people who are seriously struggling. So currently how it works is there are a number of programs that people can apply for in terms of repaying their debt based off of, not having enough money to pay for the debt. There's a normal way of paying off your loans where you're just paying off your loans based off of the principal, the interest, and how quickly you want to pay it off. And that's normal. There's no special program you need to go into to do that. But let's say those payments are too large, too expensive, and you can't handle it. You just got out of school and you're not making enough money. There's a number of programs that you can apply to that will base how much you have to pay off of your current income. They'll look at it every year and reevaluate it based off of how much you're making. And there are a number of different programs with different percentages of your income that you have to pay. Biden is going to be he's having the Department of Education create a new program that is for undergraduate loans. The monthly payments will be capped at 5% of a borrower's discretionary income. And discretionary income is actually going to be changed. The definition is going to be changed. It used to be discretionary income was anything above 150% or 175%. One of those, I think it's 150% of the poverty line. Anything more than that's discretionary income. Well, they're changing discretionary income to mean 225% of the poverty line. So not only is the cap lower at 5% when the lowest cap before was 10%, so that lowest cap is being halved, but the amount of money that the 5% is being taken out of has also been reduced. And so it's increasing the number of people who don't have to pay anything, and then those who do have to pay less because their discretionary income has been reduced and because their percentage has been reduced as well. Is that confusing, or does that make sense, Dan?
It would probably make sense on a normal day. At some point in there, I was thinking, I am as stupid as a dumb houseplant. So, what's the impact? Assuming that we've got a lot of other houseplants listening.
So this one, I like how you just said that anyone who didn't get what I just said is as stupid as a houseplant. Obviously, that's
they may
not
be
true,
smarter than that, but you never know.
I just threw a bunch of numbers. It makes sense when you've been reading about it all day, and I understand most of you haven't. So ignore Dan's insult. You may be as stupid as a houseplant, but that has nothing to do with whether or not you understood what I just said. How about that? I don't want to take the houseplant insult off the table.
Yes, but you don't
separate it.
But you'd like to give the houseplant a benefit of a doubt. It's just that maybe they could understand it. This is what I got there. So, all right, fair enough. If that's how you want to handle it.
So what this is doing is it's primarily designed to help low income people who aren't making as much as they should be making after going to school.
And by should be making is the theoretical you go to college because it's going to make you...
Because you'll be making more.
Get paid a lot.
Yeah, so once again, let's go back to our favorite example, the med students and the lawyers who spent a lot on college and are now making a lot. Whoop-de-doo, they're not going to benefit nearly as much from this as someone who went and got some random degree and is now back at whatever they were doing before, or whatever they could do if they didn't go to school. You know what I mean? So, for example, I'm working at a warehouse right now. I have a bachelor's degree. My bachelor's degree had no impact on my current job situation. You know what I mean? So, so my bachelor's degree is not providing any financial benefit for me, which is not surprising. I got a liberal arts degree. I didn't plan on it making money for me. But a lot of people have been told, hey, if you go to college, you're going to be better off. It's going to be that ticket to a better life, as Biden said. Well, now they've got that ticket and they can't find the better life, and they've got crap wages, but they have this huge amount of student debt. This is actually going to help them, and this one is based off of need. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If you have a small amount of debt and you're doing fine financially, this isn't going to help you at all. Like, I look at this and I'm like, okay, well, we were planning on paying off our debt in a reasonable manner, and we were going to have a small amount of debt compared to what we're going to be making. So this probably won't affect, me and my wife at all. It's not going to affect us at all. But those who are really struggling, it is going to help them. And that's the gist of it. By changing it from 10% of their income to 5% of their income is going to, for a lot of people, cut their payment in half. And then the last thing that it does that I didn't mention that is confusing but important is that it also affects the interest. So how it works is you have interest on these loans. How it worked in the past is if you were on one of these plans, and let's say your discretionary income is 0 because you're making 150% of the poverty line or less, you would still be collecting interest on those loans, even though you're in a protected plan. You know what I mean? So this plan's helping you. You're not in default. You don't have to pay anything because you're not making really any money. But that interest is still collecting in the background. Well, the good news is if you never make any money, you'll never have to pay that, right? But let's say things get better for you 6 years from now, and now you are making more money, and you want to pay off the loans in a reasonable manner. Well, now they've ballooned because of all this interest that's been accumulating unhampered for the past 6 years. So what they've done to change that is that if you are in one of these plans and you're paying a certain amount, that amount's going to go towards interest like normal. But any amount of interest that isn't getting paid won't accumulate. So if you're paying 0% because you're below the 225% of the poverty line, it will not accrue any interest while you're in that plan. So it's a huge boon and a huge benefit for need-based help for people who are having student loans, which if you're going to do something like this, having it be need-based makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does. It does. This, as you suggested earlier, these parts of this bill make more sense. They make a lot more sense.
Yes, especially when the argument is you have these huge debts that people are trapped in. The people who are trapped are the people who are applying for these kind of programs. And so those are the people that are going to benefit from these changes. The people like me who aren't struggling, but who are like, yeah, I'll take the free money, aren't going to benefit from this.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Yes, that's what you want.
That's
what you want.
Just like I'm not benefiting from, any of the welfare programs that are available right now. You know what I mean? I'm not on welfare because I'm working, and that's how welfare is supposed to work.
Yes, it better... Can we at least agree that if there is a welfare program of some kind, it better reach the people who need it and not other random people? I think that's something everybody could get behind.
Yeah, and if you can't agree on that, then what you're talking about is not welfare. What you're talking about is just giving everyone more money, which is called inflation, and that's something different.
Yeah, that's right. That's an entirely different category. It's... These parts are the most interesting. I've heard literally nothing about them aside from our own research into it. I haven't heard a
people
word.
Are not talking about. They're talking about the 10,000. They're talking about the 20,000. Occasionally, in the actual articles, you'll find, people talking about it. But in terms of social media, in terms of, news outlets, people actually talking about it. No, people care about the 10,000 and 20,000, even though these student loan system changes are a big deal and are going to help people who are seriously struggling.
Yes.
Because people who have $70,000 in student loan debt, taking 10 grand off the top's not going to save them. You know what I mean? In terms of what it's going to do, it won't change that much. If they already can't meet the minimum payment, taking 10,000 off the top's not going to help them.
No.
But something like this would.
Yes. This makes a lot more sense, for sure. If I had to, rate them how much good they're going to do, I think that first one, like you said, the people who are drowning in debt and not really making money, 10, 20,000, it's something, but it's a drop in the ocean in terms of their problems. They're underwater and they're getting further underwater. It's not going to change that. The fact that they're only 6 feet underwater instead of 7 feet underwater is they still can't breathe, right?
Yeah,
and especially if they're sinking anyway. It's like
we've got several problems and none of them are being fixed.
Right. So the other major complaint that push back against this is that people will say, "Look, we do need to help the people who are underwater." And they're often even comfortable with helping everybody in general. They don't mind the student loan forgiveness, the broad student loan forgiveness. But they then say, if the reason there is a more fundamental problem, and it's in the system itself rather than in the fact that some people are just struggling with their loans, right? This could be, why target this at student loan people and not target this at everybody in debt?
Who's struggling.
Everybody who's struggling. Yeah. Why is this a welfare program? specifically, why would we need one specifically for student loan debt? Now, $1.6 trillion is an absolutely mad amount of money. That's an insane amount of money for people to owe on these particular loans. Do you feel like with these changes that we've made some kind of significant improvement to the loan system?
Say it one more time.
Is there let me just try that again entirely. Where are we at? 46.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, it's fine. It's a terrible question. If I were going to rank the individual pieces of this, I'd say the first part is nearly useless. It would have to be much more targeted for it to be helpful. The second part,
it's useless in terms of fixing the problem. So now I want to talk about the third part. So the second part is actually trying to help people who are struggling with the student loans. There's also a tweaking to the public service loan forgiveness program, and that's part of that, is trying to help people get their loans taken care of. That one has to do if people are working for the government. Basically, they qualify for loan forgiveness after a certain amount of time, and it's helping them get that money. The third section is one I'm going to read straight from the whitehouse.gov's a release on this student loan forgiveness, their fact sheet, as they call them. And I'm just going to read this whole paragraph because this is what they outline this third section is. So first, in bold, the title for the section: protect future students and taxpayers by reducing the cost of college and holding schools accountable when they hike up prices. Now I'm going to read the paragraph. The president championed the largest increase to Pell Grants in over a decade and one of the largest one-time influxes to colleges and universities. To further reduce the cost of college, the president will continue to fight to double the maximum Pell Grant and make community college free. Meanwhile, colleges have an obligation to keep prices reasonable and ensure borrowers get value for their investments, not debt they cannot afford. This administration has already taken key steps to strengthen accountability, including in areas where the previous administration weakened rules. The Department of Education is announcing new efforts to ensure student borrowers get value for their college costs. I wanted to read the whole paragraph because I'm now going to straw man their argument, and so I wanted them to have a chance to defend themselves before I viciously attack them.
Before you straw man, before you misrepresent the argument and kill a straw man that is not that argument.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to have a hard time not doing that because this to me just reads like lip service. You know what I mean? This last section reads to me like, by the way, we understand that the whole system is broken and we really want to fix it, and we hope someone does. That's the straw man argument. It's not what they're saying, but it's close enough to make me uncomfortable.
I like that reading. That's much more fun than the words they actually said. Because
so this is not the straw man, but a real concern is in this paragraph. They're talking about two concerns, and one of them is the president's going to increase the Pell Grant amount of money that people can get. In other words, the federal government is going to pick up more of the tab for college, both by making community college free and by drastically increasing Pell Grants. In other words, there's paying a lot more towards these colleges. In other words, there's going to be more money available to pay for college. On the flip side, they want colleges to keep their prices reasonable. But as we've talked about with basic economics, if students can go to a more expensive college without it costing them more, because the federal government has picked up more of the tab, what is the incentive for those colleges to keep their prices reasonable? And if no one has accountability in terms of what their college accomplishes in terms of their degree, because people aren't paying nearly as much for it, which means they don't care as much about what they get from it, and they're being told over and over again, maybe by the president, that they just need to go to college because it's their ticket to a better life, where's the accountability going to come from? You're talking about vague Department of Education goals about ensuring student borrowers get value for their college costs, reading off of the fact sheet. What is that? what is that really? You know what I mean? That is not a concrete plan. If you had a concrete plan, I think we'd have some more details, but I don't think you have a concrete plan. I think you have a vague desire that's has to be vague because this is a massive, massive series of institutions with a large amount of collective lobbying power. I mean, these universities are usually state universities. These states have a lot of control over these universities. They have a lot of prestige from the universities. It's just a lot of money tied up in these universities. And so throwing around these vague aphorisms is not going to fix any of those problems.
It isn't. This is what we would like to happen. We'd like to pay for more of your college, and we'd like for that not to increase the price of college. Right? We want to increase the demand for college, and we don't want that to drive the price up. That's not how economics works, right? You increase the demand, the number of people who want to, which is what you're going to do if you offer to pay for more of the expense. There's only so many places for students, right? There's only so many colleges. It's ridiculously hard to create a new college at this point in time. If you didn't know, this is to jump back to our broader look from the previous episode. Student loans are absolutely critical to driving up the cost of college. They are the number one driver of it, precisely because they radically increase demand. They make people who cannot afford to go able to go.
It's because you're moving the price away from the product.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because student loans, even though you may have to end up paying for it one day, you don't have to think about it when you're purchasing it. You know what I mean? Like when you go to a furniture store and they say, hey, you don't have to make a payment for the first 6 months and we defer interest for this long. That's what student loans do, but to the nth degree. They say, first of all, the government will pay half of it. What you're being charged here, because you're low income, we're just going to cover half the bill. Well, doesn't that make it more likely you'll buy furniture at that store? Regardless of the past, regardless of the price, even if it's 30% more than it used to be, because hey, you're getting 50% off. You know what I mean? So it's okay if they're charging a little bit more. On top of that, hey, the entire time you're in school, you won't have to make a payment, and you won't be accruing interest on that debt. And then after that, you can sign up for a minimum income payment thing. So even if you have a massive amount of debt, you only have to pay 5% of your discretionary income. That's pretty reasonable. And then on top of that, the debt may be wiped out 10 years from now when we have another Democratic president. So don't worry about that either. You know what I mean? You're just moving the cost of the item farther and farther away from the time of sale.
Yes.
And the more you do that, the less scrupulous you have to be as a consumer about what you're buying.
Yeah.
You're like, it doesn't matter. It's basically just free at this point.
Yeah, and then you say no credit checks necessary, right? This is we don't even check your credit. We just you qualify for all this. The federal government doesn't care, and you can take out you can get as much as you want. I mean, there's limits to the student loans you can take.
Yeah, to some degree.
In terms of how much you can take at any one moment, but across time, you can take as much as...
Yeah, and in terms of your average student who's going to a state college, which isn't too crazy expensive, the loans are it's a large amount of money you can take out.
Yeah.
Relative to the cost of tuition. The solution is simple, and it's not even being mentioned here. It's because it's not acknowledging the fact that the federal student loans are the problem.
Yeah.
They're talking about these schools raising prices. Like, how could they? It's like, well, of course the schools are going to raise prices. Number one, costs for most things are going up. Number two, if people are willing to pay more, why not increase costs? Increase prices. And then when you have all this free money just floating around, it's going to be picked up and it's going to be spent. And so you need to reevaluate the entire process, the entire system here, because it's really screwing with incentives.
It really is. if your purpose of going to school is to learn something particular, like you want to know, you want to gain knowledge, then picking what you're interested in or what you want to learn is a good, is a good way to do that. It's a good way to do that. You'll have a professor who pushes you. You'll have a curriculum. You'll have things that you go through, and you can learn that subject if you work at it. If what you're looking for is a job and to make a certain amount of money, that is a fundamentally different goal. And turns out the college does not pay you. And somehow the college, how you're paying for the college and the job you're going to get need to line up. And right now, they don't even pretend to. Right? Most jobs at this point train you how to do the work. And yes, your schooling may help you depending on what you went into, what you studied. But like law schools, law school is a good example. Of course, it's another school after a school. Your bachelor's degree to get into law school doesn't matter. It could be in ballet. Yeah. Now that won't help you pass the LSAT. But there's a lot of jobs like that. A lot of advanced degrees, or a lot of work that is like that, where it's like you're going to get in there and you're going to then learn how to do the job. Law school, actually, even after law school, you go to law school and then you get in there. Most law firms lose money on their new hires for several years.
To get them
before they become competent enough to actually be worth what they're paying them. Which is a weird world, and actually law school students don't actually get employed at nearly the rate that people think they would. Right now, there's a lot of law school people.
No, and I would say that, law students are an example of a group who can be stuck in a bad place after going to school, because it is very expensive.
It is very expensive, and the likelihood that you get a job is actually quite low these days, unless you go to a really prestigious school or unless you're top of your class. Neither here nor there. The loan system, as it is, incentivizes you to do whatever with no accountability. If you had a similar loan system for starting a business, you would end up with the most useless and random businesses in the world. Instead, what happens is you have to have a business plan, and you have to persuade people that it's going to work, that it's worth risking. And anyway, we can go on. And the problems with the loan system, you can't escape it. You can't declare bankruptcy and get out of a student loan. It's the only loan in the world, in the US, that you can't get out of. Every other loan, you can at some point be like, all right, it's over. I'm never going to be able to pay you back. And that's it. You can't do that with a student loan. You can't escape it. There's so many things about this. And like I said, we had another episode on this where we went into the kind of system of how this works. That is a good reference point if you're not familiar with those ideas.
But yeah, it's we've got a whole bunch of screwy incentives, and this third part of President Biden's plan is not what it should be. There needs to be a third part, and it needs to be massive reform. And that's not what it is. Instead, what it is a couple of concrete things, like dumping more money into the system through Pell Grants, which isn't evil. You know what I mean? It's not an awful thing to do. It's going to help out a lot of people in terms of helping them go to college. But as Dan is saying, it's not going to help them make sure they're going to a college that's actually going to help them get a job. Part of the fundamental problem here is that Biden's initial statement is fundamentally flawed, that he's describing college as this ticket, and it's the ticket to a better life, and that is just no longer true. Instead, there are certain degrees at certain colleges that are a ticket to a better life, and then there are a whole lot of degrees and a whole lot of colleges where that may not be the case, where it's either a roll of a dice, or there are a whole slew of degrees that simply won't help you get a better life at all. You may enjoy it, you may have a good time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a ticket to a better life, and describing college, period, as a ticket to a better life is just the biggest lie.
It really is.
And as long as we believe that lie and combine that with free money to go to school, what's going to happen? You're just going to have increased, droves of new students going to school, taking out large amounts of debt, and continuing this downward cycle, both for college education and for massive amounts of student loans for people after college who cannot afford to pay them off. In other words, the problem is just going to get worse, and there is no solution being proposed with this new plan that is going to fix the overarching problems. That point 1 and point 2, while point 2 is better with the changing how the loan system works, is still a band-aid solution, and their proposed solution for the actual underlying problem is actually going to make the underlying problems worse and not better.
This has been an episode of Rethinking Politics. You can find us on all of the major podcasting apps or on YouTube. You can reach out to us at rethinkingpoliticspodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit our website at rethinkingpolitics.podbean.com, where you can support us via Patreon. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.